On the broadcast tonight, 2 dead and hundreds are unaccounted for as rescuers scramble to find survivors in a passenger ship that sunk off Korea's southwestern coast. Most of the more than 400 passengers were high school students. A long-delayed South Korea-U.S. defense cost-sharing pact has gained approval in Parliament. Seoul will pay $886 million this year, up 5.8% from last year. High-level officials from Korea and Japan meet for talks on resolving their decades-long differences over Japan's sexual enslavement of women before and during World War II. Early edition begins now.
당신의 유럽은 어디였나요?
Excellence in flight. Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in Washington, noon in Kiev, and 6 on a Wednesday evening here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gun-young.
And I'm Daniel Chua. Thank you for joining us.
We continue our coverage on the sinking of passenger ferry off the southwestern coast of Korea, with some 470 people on board, 320 of which were students traveling with several teachers to the resort island of Jeju on a field trip.
The Coast Guard has confirmed at least 2 deaths so far. Let's turn to our Connie Kim for the latest. Connie, do we have any updates on the numbers? They've changed throughout the day quite a bit.
Yes, Daniel, you mentioned the 2 deaths. The South Korean Navy has confirmed that a 22-year-old woman and a male high school student have been killed. The number of people rescued stands at 164, according to the Ministry of Security and Public Administration. That stands in stark contrast to what the ministry said earlier in the day when it put the number of those rescued from the ship at 368. The ministry said in a press briefing that the confusion came from some passengers that had been pulled safely from the vessel being counted twice. It also confirmed that 293 people are still unaccounted for.
The reason for the confusion in the number of rescued people, the reason it was revised down from the earlier figure of 368 to the current 164, is because some of those who were rescued were counted twice.
Now finding them safely is a race against time. The Seoul ferry started to sink this morning hours ago, some 20 kilometers off the coast of Chindo Island in southwestern Korea. To search for survivors, the Coast Guard sent a rescue team of 40 people into the sunken vessel about an hour ago. However, rescue operations are expected to be difficult as the tidal currents are very fast.
So Connie, time is of the essence, obviously. How large in scale is the rescue operation?
Well, more than 60 ships, including 20 naval vessels, helicopters, and aircraft are actively searching for survivors, along with around 160 scuba divers. President Park Geun-hye and Defense Minister Kim Kwon-jin have ordered that all Navy, Coast Guard, and nearby vessels help with the efforts. Also, the U.S. ship LHD that was on routine patrol has joined the rescue operations as well. It dispatched helicopters to the area, but has returned to the ship waiting for further tasking.
Connie, do we have any reports or updates on what exactly caused the accident?
Well, that's still not clear right now, but officials say there's a high possibility that the passenger ship ran into a rock due to foggy weather. At the site of the crash, waters are reportedly 37 meters deep with lots of rocks in the area. Also, the Coast Guard says the ship was being driven by a substitute captain as its original one was on vacation. Officials from the Coast Guard also say there is a high possibility that passengers may have gotten trapped when the power was cut off after the ship tilted. The people who were rescued say they heard a loud bang before the ship started showing signs of trouble. Let's listen to some of the survivors of this ferry accident.
The waves were calm when the ferry set off. Then all of a sudden the ship felt like it flipped on its side violently. People were cornered and they couldn't get out of their cabins because they couldn't open the doors. The ship tilted by 60 degrees and slowly inclined to 90 degrees before capsizing, and that was when I was rescued.
I screamed for 30 to 40 minutes in the ferry. Things were falling and people were sliding down the ship.
We'll continue to monitor and report on any new developments while, of course, wishing for the best.
Well, Connie Kim, thank you for that report. We'll check back with Connie later in our newscast.
Now, the search for survivors in waters off Korea's southwestern coast continues, and joining us now is Michelle Park for a look at the conditions down near Jindo, where the ferry went down. Michelle, how cold are the waters down in the area, and what does that mean for rescue efforts?
The water temperature at the accident site is about 12.6 degrees Celsius now. On average, a person can survive in this condition like that for about 2 hours. Now, if they're wearing life vests, the time can be extended a bit. But remember that the ship started sinking in the morning more than 8 hours ago. Now, in trying to determine the cause of this accident, authorities will be taking a hard look at the conditions at the time. Now, when the ferry departed this morning, the foggy conditions had lowered the visibility levels to about 20 kilometers, but the sea was quite calm with winds blowing at just 3 meters per second. Now, we're expecting strong winds in the area tomorrow, along with some rain, which would obviously hinder search and rescue operations. Now, we'll continue to monitor the situation down near Jindo and hope for the best.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life, talking with you on air and online, connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now on to other news. April's first plenary session opened this Wednesday with lawmakers passing 22 bills that had been sitting on the shelf, many for months. While they were approving legislation, high-level Korean defense officials were in Washington trying to hammer out an agreement on when to hand over wartime operational control to Seoul. Our political correspondent Kim Young-gil reports.
The ruling and opposition parties came together to pass a number of long-pending bills this Wednesday at the National Assembly. After months of gridlock, lawmakers passed the revised Defense Cost-Sharing Pact with the U.S. Seoul and Washington had agreed in January to renew the Special Measures Agreement that lays out the cost each side pays for the 28,500 U.S. troops stationed on South Korean soil. Under the deal, South Korea will pay some $880 million annually from this year through 2018, a 5.8% increase from its share last year. Approval of the pact was delayed over concerns that it requires Seoul to pay more than is necessary. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy had expressed the most concern, wondering aloud whether Washington would divert some of Seoul's share of the money to finance the relocation of a U.S. military base in the country. The ratified bill will go into effect after being signed by President Park Geun-hye. Over in Washington, South Korea and the U.S. opened a high-level military meeting at the Pentagon on Tuesday local time, with North Korea and pending alliance issues topping the agenda. The two-day integrated defense dialogue began with Seoul requesting for another delay in the transfer of wartime operational control from the U.S. to South Korea. Seoul is currently scheduled to regain wartime operational control in 2015, but the government says the nation's military needs more time to prepare for the transfer. The two sides have reportedly agreed in principle on a delay due to the ongoing threat posed by North Korea, but the exact timing and other details are still being ironed out. The two allies will sit down with Japan for defense trilateral talks starting Thursday. 김영길, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Korea and Japan are currently holding their first working-level talks on the so-called comfort women issue in Seoul today. But as our Hwang Sang-hee tells us, it'll take much more than one meeting to mend decades of sour ties.
Senior officials from Korea and Japan met in Seoul Wednesday as they seek to resolve the long-standing dispute over Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. The rare meeting is the result of an agreement reached ahead of President Park Geun-hye's first official talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in the Netherlands last month. Korea is expected to reiterate its demand for an official apology and legal compensation from Japan for the so-called comfort women. Tokyo claims the issue was settled through a 1965 treaty signed by the two neighbors when they normalized diplomatic ties. But a report by Kyodo News Agency Wednesday on a meeting between Japanese and Korean officials in Tokyo in February suggests a shift in Japan's attitude. At the meeting, Japan reportedly said it wants to resolve the comfort women issue before next year, which is the 50th anniversary of the two countries normalizing their diplomatic ties. The report also said the Japanese government is reviewing various humanitarian measures, including providing government support funds for the victims and an official apology by the Japanese ambassador to Korea. Tokyo is reportedly even mulling the possibility of issuing a letter to the comfort women under the prime minister's name. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese army in comfort stations during the early 20th century. But most agree that just one round of talks will not be enough for the two neighbors to overcome decades of diplomatic tensions. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
The top nuclear envoys of China and the United States have wrapped up their second day of talks in New York on ways to resume the long-stalled six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. Both sides are playing their cards close to their chest in regards to the details, but Washington says the dialogue has been productive. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
Chinese nuclear envoy Wu Da-wei and his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies met for the second time this week to discuss ways to lure North Korea back to the six-party talks on its own denuclearization. In a statement Tuesday, the U.S. State Department said the talks had been productive and both sides had agreed on the fundamental importance of a denuclearized North Korea. The Chinese delegate did not comment about the closed-door meeting. Diplomatic sources in the United Nations were paying close attention to whether Wu would propose an arbitration plan on the human rights issue in North Korea. Pyongyang threatened to conduct a fourth nuclear test if the international community crossed the line by bringing up the regime's human rights abuses. The Chinese delegation spent 5 days in Pyongyang last month and has reportedly drawn up an arbitration plan that contains the North Korean stance on the matter. Wu and Davies will hold the third and last meeting in Washington on Friday. The meeting comes as Beijing's foreign ministry issued a rare statement Tuesday, saying it's opposed to any move that may result in tensions in the region, whether they be joint drills between South Korea and the U.S. or North Korea's threat of conducting further nuclear tests. It also urged all related parties to make joint efforts to ease the situation and said China would continue to play a positive role in promoting peace and stability in the region. The six-party talks made up of South Korea, China, the U.S., Russia, and Japan were suspended after North Korea walked out of them in 2008. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
So high-level officials from South Korea and Japan are sitting down for the first time ever to talk about the, quote, comfort women issue. Now, meanwhile, the surviving victims were standing up and demanding justice outside the Japanese embassy in Seoul, as they have been doing each and every Wednesday since January 1992. Arirang News' Yurian was there, and she files us this report.
Shouts ring out, calling on Japan to atone for its sexual enslavement of women during World War II. Every Wednesday for the past 22 years, victims of the atrocities carried out by Japan relive their painful past here, in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. Ahead of the first ever governmental meeting between Korea and Japan on the issue of so-called comfort women, a euphemism for sex slaves, the victims were cautiously optimistic.
All we want is the Japanese government to recognize its wrongdoings, apologize, and provide legal compensation. But we will have to wait to see what they really have in mind.
Civic leaders were concerned that the meeting was simply a show put on by the Japanese government, wary about its strained relationship with the United States in recent months.
We will have to see if the Japanese government came to seek resolution or only came because of pressure from Washington ahead of President Obama's visit to Japan and Korea next week. I hope it's the former.
With hopes running high, the former comfort women were joined by supporters at the rally.
Even the idea of using comfort women is unacceptable. That is the universal opinion. I plead as a Japanese citizen that Japan apologize and make sure such things never happen again.
The South Korean government should not give a lukewarm response, but rather make strong demands on behalf of these comfort women.
Only 55 Korean women identified as former sex slaves remain alive today. But the doors to the Japanese embassy remain closed to their calls for justice. The ignorance of the Japanese government is becoming ever harder to bear for the victims who have grown frail from decades of waiting. Time is running out. Yurian, Arirang News.
Back here in Korea, looking at the economy, rigorous spending aimed at revitalizing the local economy. That's what was on the minds of Korea's top economic policymaker during a regular meeting on this Wednesday. Our economics correspondent, Na Young-kyung, has more.
Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok says the government will accelerate its rate of spending in the first half of the year to help boost Korea's economy and make people actually feel the effects of improving economic conditions.
Second quarter spending will be expanded to exceed the original first half of the year guideline of 55%. The money will be spent with a special focus on supporting the nation's small and mid-sized firms, so that 60% of the year's budget allocated for the finance sector is used in the first half of the year.
The government executed 24% of its finance budget in the January to March period. That's slightly below its target of 28%. The finance minister is now pushing to spend what was left over in the first quarter, plus more than its 27% target for the second quarter. Hyun, while stressing Korea's economy is on a path of moderate recovery, emphasized that external uncertainties such as the U.S. stimulus scale back and the slowdown in the Chinese economy should be closely monitored, and he also pledged to spur domestic investment. The government will continue to make sure its $28 billion investment project is run as planned throughout the year. The project consists of 19 tasks aimed at easing regulations on restricted properties and utilizing them to secure investment, for example, for building company towns and special economic zones. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
It seemed to be narrowing, but apparently not enough. Korea's biggest companies say they're committed to hiring more women, but the data suggest otherwise, saying that there's a bigger gender gap in Korea. So Korea's top 20 companies, female workers accounted for just 70% of their workforce last year. That's up just 3 percentage points from a decade earlier. And at some companies like Samsung Electronics and LG Display, the ratio of female workers even dropped. The data indicates that internet-based firms appear to be more apt to hire women than manufacturing companies. And as a means of boosting employment, small and mid-sized Korean companies that create more full-time jobs will be exempt from an annual tax audit. The National Tax Service said Wednesday that the incentive will be for companies with revenue of less than $28 million, and particularly for those hiring young people. The government on Tuesday also unveiled a set of other measures to tackle the nation's low youth employment rate, which stood at 39.7% last year, which is far below the OECD nation's average of 50%. Companies will have their benefits removed if there is any signs of tax evasion. Moving on to other parts of our world, tensions are escalating in Ukraine. Ukraine's armed forces retook a small airport as Kiev formally launches its anti-terror operation against pro-Russian forces. Ukraine's military are said to be on their way to those flashpoint cities in eastern Ukraine, causing some to worry the country could be on its way to civil war. Here's Connie Lee with more.
Heavy gunfire and fighter jets were heard and seen swooping over an airfield in East Ukraine. Authorities say Ukrainian armed forces retook a military airfield from pro-Russian forces on Tuesday. It was a first formal military action by Ukraine against pro-Russian militants.
The main purpose of these actions is to protect Ukrainian citizens to stop terrorism, crime, and attempts to tear apart our country.
Witnesses say Ukrainian troops stepped out of military helicopters in a heavy pro-Russian area of Kramatorsk. Despite the gunfire, though, locals have not confirmed casualties as reported by Russian media. And around the same time, a similar operation of Ukrainian army troops and special forces were deployed in a nearby city of Slavyansk to take back control of government buildings there. Russia says Ukraine is on the brink of a civil war and has asked the United Nations to condemn Kiev's latest military operation. However, the UN Secretary General's press office said that Ban Ki-moon spoke on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday and requested that all parties calm the situation.
The Secretary General is gravely concerned by the disturbances currently ongoing in eastern Ukraine. He has called on all parties to do their utmost to try to de-escalate the situation and avoid further violence.
The U.S. also spoke out, saying Ukraine's government has a responsibility to respond to provocations in its country, but added that Washington was not considering sending arms to Kiev. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And now for the latest on the ferry sinking off Korea's southwestern coast. Let's go live to our Connie Kim once again.
Connie, any new developments so far?
Well, Daniel, updating you over the sinking ferry in the southwestern coast of Korea. 452 people on board, including some 320, were students who were traveling with several teachers to the resort island of Jeju. The Ministry of Security and Public Administration has confirmed that there are 2 confirmed deaths, with 164 passengers rescued and still 293 passengers on the search. Now, more than 60 ships, including 20 naval vessels, helicopters, and aircraft, are actively searching for survivors, with around 170 rescue personnel on the search for missing passengers. This nationwide search will continue on until tomorrow morning, when they will start drawing up the vessel when tidal currents are calm. President Park Geun-hye dropped by the National Emergency Management Agency just moments ago, and she ordered the officials to do all they can to rescue all those missing. The first distress signal was sent from the ferry at around 9 a.m. local time, which is roughly about 7 hours ago. Back to you, Daniel.
Right, roughly 9 hours ago, 9.5 hours ago right now. All right, we wish the rescue efforts all the best, and we will have more updates later in the newscast. Now let's get a check on the weather conditions with our Michelle Park for details. Michelle.
Good evening, guys. It's been a great day here in the capital with lots of clouds and fog here and while the fine dust advisory is in effect in the central region. Now we're expecting a nationwide rain, bringing down this unseasonably warm weather and clearing out the fine dust and fog. So until then, wear a mask on your way out or even try to stay indoors if possible. Now going over to our readings, Seoul tops out at 9 degrees in the morning and gets up to 22 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will get up to 20 and 18 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island peaks at 21 degrees, Dokdo at 15, while Mankumgang tops out at 10. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
All right, thank you, Michelle, for that. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Just to give you a wrap-up of the ferry sinking off Korea's southwestern coast, a ferry with 459 people on board sunk off the Korea's southwestern coast earlier this Wednesday. And at about 9 a.m. Korea time, the first distress call was received. So that was 9.5 hours ago. Now, authorities here have confirmed 2 deaths so far, with 164 people rescued and 293 remaining unaccounted for. The rescue efforts are currently underway and they are expected to continue those efforts until tomorrow morning, and we will keep you updated as the story develops.
Right, the situation may seem very bleak, but for those of us watching, do send out a prayer for those who are still missing and those who are putting in valiant efforts to rescue them from the current situation.
All right, I'm Moon Gan-young in Seoul, and we'll see you back here same time tomorrow.